Just FYI, this has probably been the 4th time I've recorded this, just because of all the background noise being so chaotic. Mommy! All the plastic bags in the background! But it's okay. It's okay, because we're here. What's poppin', everybody? It's Aliyah. Welcome back to my channel. So, per my last video on my Educate to Liberate video based on Black Lives Matter and all the recent events that have been going on, I have decided to turn it into a series. You know, I'm all about each one teach one, and I just want to share my knowledge, share my thoughts and my opinions, and kind of, you know, engage in a productive, knowledgeable conversation, you know? So it's time for us to get smart. If you see me looking down, it's because I have my little notepad. Why don't people want me to succeed? So today's topic, as you can see from the title, we are talking about what does it mean to be politically correct. Now, most specifically, I'm talking about when we use terms in order to describe people's identity. So for instance, the tendency to use African American as opposed to using Black. So me, you know, as a Black girl living in the South Bronx, I always used to wonder why people are so quick to kind of use African American when describing a large group of Black people all the time. Just because I know if there's one thing that we can say is that not everybody is African American in this nation here. They really aren't. When you have a huge conglomerate of people that come from so many different walks of life, whether they have been living here their entire lives due to our tragic history with slavery, or have parents that have immigrated here from other countries, whether that be from West Africa or the Caribbean or even other parts of Latin America, that doesn't necessarily classify them as African American. So while using socially common terms may be more acceptable and more so considered polite, and I use that with scare quotes, what we're doing is actually can be really counterproductive in terms of not recognizing all the different types of identities that do exist and that people choose to identify themselves with. So I kind of want to get into this whole idea of using African American versus Black. So again, all opinions are strictly my own, but I will, you know, link stuff down below for, you know, backing up my facts. So when we think about terms like African American, more than likely they are considered terms that describe nationality. So for example, myself, I would consider myself an African American just because I was born and raised in the US, and the generations before me, my family has been in this country since its founding. So in that way, I would self-identify as African American. However, for lots of my friends whose parents are immigrants to this country and also did not at first have an understanding of how American society does operate, being called African American just doesn't make sense for some of them. It just doesn't click, because it's kind of like, well, I'm not African American. We're part of this diaspora, but I choose to identify as Haitian American or just Haitian, not even American in that sense, especially if you've just recently immigrated to the United States. That goes the same way for people of other backgrounds as well. However, in my personal opinion, using the word Black, it isn't a bad thing. It isn't, so don't be afraid to use it. However, because even though Black denotes race is not real. So again, race is not real. It is not. However, the things that result because of racism create a very, very real experience for people that look like me. When I use the word Black, it's more so, of course, referring to phenotype, which is how you look, and the experience that you have based on how you are perceived. Black just doesn't mean one group of people in terms of we're very flat. If you're Black, we already know Black is beautiful and Black is so diverse. There's so many different forms of Blackness all across the world, across the globe. However, when we use the term Black, it does refer to a specific experience that people of darker skin tend to have similar experiences because of how they are perceived. I usually like to say your skin speaks for you before you even have a chance to speak for yourself. And unfortunately, that's the type of world that we live in. So it's really important to kind of understand what using that term means, especially when we're talking about social justice and the justice for marginalized groups. When we talk about people of color, or specifically Black people, there is a large difference in how Black people are treated in America versus non-Black people of color. Every group of color has their own kind of qualms in how they're treated. In this crazy world, there is a very specific experience of Black people. That's why you shouldn't be afraid to use the word. While we're on the topic, I'd also like to kind of go to the opposite end of the spectrum and kind of talk about white and using the term white versus Caucasian. So this word Caucasian, you know, it always makes my skin like kind of itch in a weird way, just because, you know, it's just very, it's supposed to be very polite, very proper way of speaking, you know, that Caucasian person over there. You know, Joanne the Scammer profoundly knows herself to be as a Caucasian woman.
Get out of my Caucasian house. Get out of my Caucasian house.
However, when we use the word Caucasian, it actually doesn't really carry much weight at all. The word actually kind of stems from a German scientist and anthropologist. His name is Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. So very German, and he was actually one of the pioneers in discovering and creating terminology around the races, the science behind it, or what we now call eugenics. So at his point in time, there were only considered 3 races. There was Negroid, which would be considered Black people. There was Mongolian, which would be considered Asian people. And then there was Caucasian, which would be considered white people, or those from Europe. And actually, matter of fact, so the Caucasus Mountains are in what is now Eurasia, or the very border of Asia into Europe, and actually consists of the countries such as Georgia, and Azerbaijan. I'm gonna list it right here because obviously I can't say it right now. So believe it or not, when Blumenbach was actually doing his research, he actually came to his own personal conclusions, very incited by his own bias, that the most beautiful race of men, I mean the Georgians, meaning those people who are from the country of Georgia in Eurasia. So even though we've kind of, you know, taken this word Caucasian and ran with it, it's very interesting how it actually came out of someone's own bias, their own subjective views as to what was considered beauty and what we now have termed as, you know, white standards of beauty. It also shows you that you really have to question everything that you know to this day and why we have certain terms or where they come from. So the whole point of me actually mentioning the word Caucasian and how it relates to phenotype is the fact that when we think of Caucasian, it denotes a certain type of person that has light or whiter skin, but of course that only pertains to European, in recognition of how there have been many different court cases where people have argued for their right to be called Caucasian have been denied just because they don't fit the typical standard of what we now consider whiteness. Because oftentimes what we would describe as objective terms or things that are neutral aren't very neutral at all. They're only neutral for a certain group of people. And if you want to read further about Blumenbach and just in general, there is a book written by a Black historian. Her name is Nell Irvin Painter, and she's wrote a book called The History of White People. It's actually really interesting and kind of goes over this whole origin of where this whole standard of whiteness comes from, which includes a lot of research that Blumenbach and his colleagues have done in the past, and how their own subjective and biased ideals have just been taken as the norm, and that's what people have been indoctrinated to understand and know for so many years before we had other types of research to debunk all those things and eugenics. So now that we've kind of just talked about it in general, like what it means to be politically correct, so it kind of made me thinking, well, what terms do I use? So again, in my personal opinion, the best way to kind of go about it is to just listen and ask questions. More than likely, whatever person of color or Black person you will encounter, you might want to ask them, well, how would you like to be identified? Because not all Black people may not want to be called Black. They might want to be called by their national identity. The Black diaspora is so diverse that there is no just one way to think of Black people. First step is to listen, actually really listen and internalize what people are telling you. Because again, everybody may not be comfortable with just one word, this one identity, because we are more than just how we appear. I hope you found this video to be very informative and that you enjoyed. So please leave me comments down below about what you think. What are your own opinions, your own point of views? I'd be really interested in hearing and having some conversation about it. So again, don't forget to like this video if you did, comment down below, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to hit that bell button down below so you get notified anytime I post a new video, especially for this series. So again, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you back. So bye.